So the world is pretty crap right now, but at least we have a great summer of gaming ahead of us for summer 2020, including Last of Us Part 2, as well as Ghost of Tsushima. And of course, if you guys missed out on that State of Play last week, where we got a ton of new info about gameplay and different crafting elements and just elements about Ghost of Tsushima that we did not know before that, make sure to go check out that live reaction that we did last week, as well as 75 facts that you didn't know about Ghost of Tsushima as well that we did over the weekend. But we do have some really cool new info that we didn't know from the State of Play that has been oh so graciously given to us by a few interviews done over the weekend as well as early on in the week. So without further ado, what is going on, guys? It is your boy TKD1 here, back here at Blazing Source, and we're gonna go over some new info that you definitely probably likely don't know already about Ghost of Tsushima. Now, in case you weren't aware, Ghost of Tsushima is not going to be a linear experience. It is an open world game that is a massive open world game that we'll talk about a little bit later on in terms of how big the map size is. But we did get some really cool notes and different, quotes about the game's length size as well. Like, how many hours will we be spending in Ghost of Tsushima? And we did have the one and only Nate Fox, the director of creative over there at the studio, and he was speaking to a Brazilian publication, Voxel, and he said a few things about being asked about what can the players expect when we are talking about how long Ghost of Tsushima is going to be. And he says here, quote, "It's a difficult question to answer because the world is a large space with a number of isolated side stories. We did several tests with people playing about 6.5 hours a day, and the results were very different. Many didn't finish the main story because they were busy exploring other aspects of the game." He was then further on asked about if players will be able to keep themselves busy with the game, and he did reply with saying, quote, 30, 40, 50 hours. Yes, absolutely. I would highly recommend that everyone get off the main route and get lost on Tsushima Island. There's a lot to discover there. And so it is definitely, obviously here, this is a pretty apparent and pretty, forthcoming quote that we could see here, considering that it's an open world and obviously, they tend to be big. So here we are. Yes, it is no question. Ghost of Tsushima will be a big game in terms of things to do in there. And I think the most noteworthy quote here is saying, when he says, because the world is a large space with a number of isolated side stories. Is he saying that, like, are we going to be having like kind of like these like side thread missions that maybe encapsulate 3 or 4 different little things that tell a small story? Like, is it gonna be like, let's say, hypothetically speaking, we are talking to a mother and father, and their child got taken from the Mongols to be used in the Mongolian army, and maybe we have Jin who has to go on this little quest to maybe find this paper trail and trying to solve where and which camp that this girl is being taken from or being held at, and we have to rescue her. Like, are we gonna have like little side stories like that? I think that could be really cool and add context to like what the Mongols did to the Japanese in the game. And so I think it could be really cool way to definitely put it up there on front and center. And obviously being 30, 40, 50 hours, I would like to assume that they mean that, all right, like maybe we can translate the 30, 40, 50 into 30 being mostly just the main story, 40 being maybe a little bit more the side missions, and then 50 hours and 60 hours could probably be the completionist, like 100% do everything in the game. So I think it's a very nice way to break it down. Definitely is par for the course for a game like this. And they do have more quotes talking about the actual size of the game from a landscape perspective. And oh man, you love to see Nate Fox out here just spreading all the info that we didn't get here on the State of Play. And this time he had a pretty substantial amount to say about the map itself and the actual size that we are going to be dealing with in the landscape of Ghost of Tsushima. And he was talking to IGN Nordic again in another interview, and he said this to start off with, quote, "The map we showed during the State of Play was very zoomed in. That was just a little portion of the starting area. The actual map is huge." And then he also goes on to say, "The island of Tsushima covers the biomes you can find on mainland Japan, from snowy mountains to bamboo forests to waterfalls and rolling grasslands. It's all there." And last up, he ends off with saying, "We want to give you enough to keep it electrifying for the player. We didn't want to make a huge map and have nothing on it, so it's packed with people, items, and stories to explore." So again, straight up here, nothing really to write home about that's really anything groundbreaking. Obviously, we knew that it was gonna be a much bigger map than what was shown here on the state of play. But it is interesting to see that, you know, if we take into account like the size of the like reticle of, you know, Jin on the map and see how far he went in terms of the actual gameplay, like if you compare that, that's a pretty decent size of, you know, chunk of land. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know obviously it wasn't the biggest thing in the world, right? But like seeing that is just a little portion of the starting area, like that is really neat to see. And you can see there's plenty of fog of war around the mini map, oh well, not mini map, the map that we saw on State of Play. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how big of a land that we get. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm very interested. I don't think they've said like how big it compares to like the Infamous 1 map or Infamous 2 or Second Son or anything like that. I don't think they have compared those two. I would love to hear them compare from that standpoint, but I have to assume, of course, it's likely going to be bigger than any of those maps before. So really cool to see that they are, of course, doubling down on just making sure that it's not only big but also filled with a lot of different things, as they say here in the bottom on the last quote, saying that it's gonna be packed with people, items, and stories to explore. So I do like that. You know, it is great to have a big map, but it does get a little bit more cumbersome when you have a big map and not a lot of things to do in it. Like, I would much prefer like a medium-sized map that has a lot of content in it than a huge massive map that doesn't have a ton of content or the same amount of content that you could put in a medium-sized map. You know what I'm saying? Like, I do like to have the world feel more full and feel more alive and not just have just space. You know what I'm saying? But I do love the prospect also that they talk about here. We did see in the trailer some different biomes and different stuff like that. I think it's gonna be really neat to see the different type of landscapes that we get on this island. I think it's gonna be great, and obviously it could serve for story purposes, and it's just gonna be an overall just great experience. I cannot wait to see how the variation of different biomes really translate into the story and into the world to make it more whole and make it more real. You know what I'm saying? Next up here, this one is a pretty interesting thing that I actually got a little bit kind of wrong in my interpretation of what they were trying to, you know, explain in the prospect of Jin also, you know, being you know, a main samurai, as well as the ghost, you know, that goes kind of against the status quo of being a samurai and is looked at as dishonorable. I was thinking that it was going to take on the type of approach where in the games from Infamous, you could be either good or bad, and you would have different skill sets that, you know, are those two different, you know, separate things that can be different from each other. So like from the hero side of Infamous, you can have different powers from the villain side of Infamous, but it looks like that's not the case at all in this game, and it's purely just gonna be two different styles that you can switch off no matter what you really decide to put in as. You can play as either one. So we had Jason Connell here, which his title is the art and creative director at the studio, and he says here a few things that really kind of unpack what exactly is going on with that aspect. So he says here, quote, "There's definitely important story moments that are more reflective of this change from samurai to ghost than others, but the reality is that even as you have gotten to some story moments, you can still play the game as this samurai. You may just be more potent or more powerful. We don't make you choose between samurai or ghost. When he's a ghost, he can turn around and play as a samurai because he's always a samurai. On the stealth state of play segment, if you wanted to jump off the roof and start fighting like a samurai, you could totally do that. We don't spec you out and suddenly you can't play as a samurai." Honestly, this is really, really great to hear, and I was a little bit confused when they were describing it, you know, in the actual in-depth state of play where they were showing off two of those different sides. I knew that, you know, overall that it's not like they would lock you out of one form or the other depending on what you choose to play more as, but it is nice to hear that you will be able to upgrade both of them simultaneously and be able to use them simultaneously no matter what, even though there are some story things that I've heard where if you lean more towards the way of the ghost, there are certain story elements that do change and certain characters you know, do go against what you are trying to do in the game. I do know that is also an aspect of it, so maybe that's the only effect that you get. Like if you lean towards a little bit more on ghost, there may be some more story implications. What he says here, there's definitely important story moments that are more reflective of this change, right, than you know, from of course the samurai to the ghost. And so there's going to be more potent story moments that really do change, but it is nice to see, like, gameplay wise and just overall as a game, you will be able to upgrade both and still utilize both, which is great to hear. And last little bit we got here, it came out actually last week. I just never really talked about it here on any of the content plays and sorts, so I figured I'd just drop it off right here. So in spite of this massive open world and just how great the game looks. You can see it on State of Play. You can see it on the gameplays we got before, the trailers before. Ghost of Tsushima looks absolutely tremendous, and with them, of course, doubling down on the size of the game, you would expect this game to be pretty, lengthy in terms of the gigabytes that this game will take up on your hard drive, but actually, it's not really the case. So it says here on the PlayStation Store that you will only need a minimum of 50 gigabytes of free space to install the game. So thank God it will not take up that much storage space on the PS4, because man, if you looked at Modern Warfare recently, it is like over 200 gigabytes. It's so massive and takes up so much space in their hard drive. It's so annoying sometimes, as well as, The Last of Us Part 2, which comes out a month prior to this, will be taking up 100 gigabytes at least on your hard drive already. So it's nice to see that they aren't taking up that much space on the hard drive. It's good to see that, because man, if we had another like 200, 100 gigabyte, type of deal here, we'd be in a little bit of a problem in terms of summer 2020, because there's definitely some games to try and play, and I need to fit all of it here on the PS4 Pro over here back home. So that's pretty much all we got here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you guys feel about the size of the game in terms of the gigabytes, the landscape, as well as the overall kind of just things that are in the actual map in terms of different items you can come across, different people you can talk to, different story quests? Also, answer me this: are you gonna be playing more as the samurai or as the ghost? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and make sure also while you are down there to check out our description where you can find our Twitter, our Discord, as well as an anchor link to listen to our long form content in podcast format. That, of course, we wrote to part 2, as well as Save Slot Podcast. Like if you enjoyed it, as well as stay subscribed to PlayStation Stores to keep up with the latest and greatest in PlayStation. Thank you for watching, and as always, greatness awaits.